Welcome to the Awakened Goddess Show, your source for inspiration, wisdom, and personal discovery. The place to learn from a diverse mix of mentors, metaphysical experts, spiritual leaders, and best-selling authors from around the world. I'm Angela Wilkinson, attraction coach and founder of The Goddess Next Door. Join me as I explore the minds of my masterful guests while they share powerful insights and easy-to-use tools you can start using right away. Now, let's tap into the energy of the Awakened Goddess and be enlightened by today's guest. Hey everyone, I'm your host, Angela Wilkinson, and welcome to this episode of the Awakened Goddess Show, the place to be for practical spirituality for daily living. Before I introduce today's guest, I have a special dedication to share. Dennis Thurston from Wilmer, Minnesota, was my very first contributor to my Indiegogo campaign. His support helped bring the Awakened Goddess Show to life. So, based on the conversations that today's guest and I have, I thought this was perfect to dedicate this particular show to him. So, Dennis, this show is dedicated to you. Thank you so much, and here's to many miracles coming your way. And now to tell you about today's guest, Maureen Muldoon. Maureen is an ex-movie star turned minister. She is a licensed spiritual counselor, speaker, storyteller, and creative life coach. She is also the spiritual director of Community Sanctuary and the creator of VoiceBox. But before we talk to Maureen today, here's a word from our sponsor, The Goddess Next Door. Are you done struggling to have what you want and feeling like life is just one challenge after the next? Are you tired of being in a dead-end relationship or wondering if your soulmate even exists? Wouldn't it be nice if everything was simple and you could manifest whatever you want as easily as you breathe? Well, in 5 weeks, the Love Spark program takes you from frustrated to fabulous as you take your life to the next level far easier than ever before. Prepare yourself for a ride down the rabbit hole and into your wonderland, where dreams become reality. Learn more at lovesparks.com or go to the podcast page at thegoddessnextdoor.com and click on the Love Spark banner. Thanks for listening. Hi, Maureen. Welcome to the show. So excited to have you here today.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. Yeah, I'm really excited to talk about miracles today with you because I know that you have really taken on A Course in Miracles in your life, and I'm really excited to find out how you approach it, miracles in general and A Course in Miracles, and just want to chit-chat about that. So,
sure.
Yeah.
It's not every day I get to visit with the Goddess Next Door, so...
On the Awakened Goddess Show, yes. Well, I think we're all awakened goddesses at some level. So, to start us off, I would really like to hear your journey from being an actress to a minister. I imagine there's a great story around that. And yeah, so I want to hear what was the catalyst and what was that all about for you?
Well, I was acting ever since I can remember, and I grew up in New Jersey. I moved into New York. I started doing theater and some TV. I think my first job was on As the World Turns. I played Dee Crane, and I was like a pregnant teenager. Oh. And then from there, well, my first professional job actually was a TV commercial. But then from there, I moved to Los Angeles. And I just started working a lot, so I realized it would be best for me to live there. So my manager had sent me to Los Angeles for pilot season. And so I realized right away that if I really wanted to work as an actress professionally, I would need to move there. So I ended up moving there, and I was married, and then my first husband left me for Miss Universe, which is kind of a segue, but an awesome story.
Yeah, I bet.
Every day you get dumped for Miss Universe, but anyhow, so then after that, I was in this deep unforgiveness, this deep state of crucifixion, what I call, where I was obsessed with the thought of vindication, and we were in the throes of a divorce, and this brings out the worst in everyone. So I had been working not just as an actress, but also as a spiritual practitioner. I got my license as a spiritual practitioner, and I was always a very thirsty soul. And I guess the way that I first found out about A Course in Miracles is that when I was first starting out in New York, I was helping a friend of mine who was going to acting school. His name was Victor. And I was helping him out because he was putting himself through law school, and he was taking acting classes to be a better lawyer.
Oh, okay.
And he was putting himself through law school by scalping tickets. And so he didn't want to get caught scalping tickets.
No.
So I was sort of his money mule, to be completely honest with you. So I would go to the concerts with him, and I would hold the money. And what had happened to me early on in my life is that my mom had passed away from breast cancer. And so when you have like a powerful loss like that, there's not very many things that you worry about from that point on, you know? Like everything just becomes, you know, a day in the life.
Right.
So I wasn't worried about getting into trouble. I really wasn't worried about anything. And so anyway, we go about having this great relationship. Victor and I were just friends. And one day he says to me, my mom wants to go over to Medjugorje to see the Blessed Mother. And at the time in Medjugorje, these kids were seeing visions of the Blessed Mother. Now, I had grown up with the Blessed Mother, and it was a big part of my upbringing. We would say the rosary like every night. We were these Irish Catholics. My mom was pretty, you know, immersed in her theology and her spirituality. And I had known about Yugoslavia, but I didn't think I would ever be able to go there because I was like some, you know, kid from New Jersey. So
Yeah.
So he told me, I'm taking my mom to Yugoslavia. And I said, I always wanted to go to Yugoslavia to see the Blessed Mother. And he said, well, why don't you come with us? And so I said, well, I'm not going to go with you because I don't have the money. And he said, don't worry, I'll pay for it.
Nice.
And so it was like this holy moment. A Course in Miracles says a miracle happens when one extends to another, when one temporarily extends to another, when one who has more gives temporarily to one who has less. And but both people have to be okay with that miracle, because a lot of times somebody might want to extend their good to you temporarily, and you might block it and say no, and you've shattered the miracle moment. So both players are really considered miracle workers. So anyhow, we go over to Yugoslavia, to Medjugorje, and like I said, I grew up Catholic, and I always had a curiosity about everything, and I always asked inappropriate questions. So most of my life, you know, you probably have this, being an interviewer, I'm sure you are very curious. So most of my life I was told, like, don't ask that question. Don't be so bold. Like I would say, why can't nuns be priests? And, you know, why do you have to wear those habits? And so most of the time I was being told, like, no, don't ask these questions. And so when I get over to Yugoslavia, we go up to the hill, we go to the top of the hill, and everyone's praying the rosary in all different languages, and it's under this beautiful moonlit sky, and we get to speak to the children. They actually tell us the message that they get that night, and then they say, do you have any questions? So the message that we happened to receive the first night we were there was, and this was like 20 years ago, was that the Blessed Mother was weeping, and she was crying because we were being disposable with our children. And at the time I didn't have any children, so I was, you know, very self-motivated and a bit selfish, and I was thinking, I came all the way to Yugoslavia to hear this message, you know what I mean? So now I feel guilty, you know what I mean, about throwing away these children that I don't even have yet, you know. So anyhow, I felt the weight of the message on me. And at the end, they asked us if we had any questions, and I thought to myself, I'm not going to ask any questions because I know what happens when I ask questions. I kind of get shut down. But for whatever reason, after he said we're going to answer questions, my hand shot up, and I thought, uh-oh. And then they picked on me, and they, you know, called me out, and I stood up, and a question came out of my mouth, and the question was, does the Blessed Mother ever laugh? And if so, what makes her happy? And I was like, oh no. And everybody in the crowd kind of turned around. There was 2,000 people up on this hill from all different, you know, and I was like, oh my God, they're all thinking, who's the town idiot? Like, how could I ask such a question? And I looked down at the woman next to me, and she was like 100 years old. And she looked like she'd been praying for a billion years with no answer. And she had like this prayer shawl on, and her hands were up by her face, and she had like these knobby old fingers. And she looked up at me, and I thought, here it comes, the response that I've been getting my whole life, don't be so bold. But instead, she looked up at me and she said, good question, honey.
Aww.
And I had this healing.
Yeah.
Like I had this total healing on top of this hill. Like me, like I had never been told good question. And I went home that night to where we were staying, and I didn't even realize the magnitude of just hearing those words, And so the next day we went up the next night to pray the rosary again on top of this hill in Yugoslavia. And it came time for questions again. And this time somebody in the front asked this question. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's the dumbest question I've ever heard in my entire life. And I was like, this recovering bad question asker. So it's funny that I, thought that about this guy. He was right up front. He raised his hand and he said, what books does the Blessed Mother recommend? And I thought, what? She doesn't read books, Yeah. She's not like a page turner. She's the Blessed Mother, for God's sakes. And so, but they had an answer for him. And they said, the Blessed Mother says that her son is working with 2 therapists in New York City on these books. And they didn't say A Course in Miracles, but what I remember at the time was them saying A Song of Prayer. And this was before, you had, phones on you or even beepers, really. I didn't have anything to write down, so I just had to remember in my small peanut brain, Song of Prayer. And so I thought, I'm going to go home. When I get back to New York, I'll find these 2 therapists and I'll figure out, the Blessed Mother's top reading list, and I'll figure out why this book is so important, right? Mm-hmm. So instead I went home and I, ended up getting pregnant and then married and then sober in that order. And then that's when I went into that, horrible unforgiveness state. And when I was in that state, I had stumbled into a bookstore and I thought maybe I should try and find that book. And I asked the woman if they had Song of Prayer, and she said no. She looked it up, and I started looking around, and for some reason that day in that bookshop, I would fall into crossing paths with A Course in Miracles. Mm-hmm. And I just kind of pulled it off the shelf. I didn't know what it was. I read the first little part which says, nothing real can be threatened and nothing unreal exists, and herein lies the peace of God. Mm. And it just washed over me, and there were 2 volumes there, and I purchased them both, and I went home to Los Angeles. I was living in Los Angeles at the time, and I was still acting, and I started teaching this from this book right away because I wanted to learn it, and I couldn't find anyone who was familiar with it. Mm. I actually found one guy who was a therapist, and he would meet me every once in a while in a Starbucks, and I'd pay him $20, and we would go over the lesson together. But I'm the type of person who was raised in a family of a lot of kids, and so I learn better with a larger group around me. Mm-hmm. So I thought, well, I had already been running groups out of my house, writing groups and 12-step groups, so I thought I'll just add Course in Miracles. And so I started teaching it right away. And one of the first students that came, or they're considered students and teachers, said, if you really want to know about A Course in Miracles, you should read this book. And she handed me a little thin pamphlet that was A Song of Prayer.
Oh, love it.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, I didn't even have to go look for it. It came right to me. And I didn't really make the connection, but the further I get from those moments, the more I go, oh, there's like a divine plan that I wasn't even aware of.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm in Los Angeles, and I have this huge other crucifixion on my heart, which was when I was a kid, and my mom passed away. The first play I was ever in was The Sound of Music. I played Liesel. So my mom was really sick when I was in this play, and she called me into her room the day of the show, and she said, I'm not going to be able to get out of bed, but I told the principal that you can come home in your costume and give me a private show. And I was devastated. I was like, I can't believe, because I was in such denial that my mom was dying. Mm. Like, I really thought everything was going to be the same. And of course she would come to my play, and of course she would always be there. And it just really was sort of a real wake-up sign to me. Like, she really can't get out of bed. So I went down to the show, and I did the show that night. And after the show, I felt so embarrassed about having something different happening at my house. You know, like I wasn't a normal kid. My mom was dying. Everyone else's moms was in the audience, and I was embarrassed by that. You know how we get embarrassed about the things that set us apart? So instead of going home in my costume, some kids invited me to go out for ice cream afterwards, and I said, okay. So I got changed back into my street clothes. I blew my mom off, and I came home late that night, and she was like, hey, what happened? And I was like, oh, I just forgot. And I didn't know how to articulate my anger, my rage, my fears. Mm-hmm. So my mom died not too long after that, and I carried this unkept promise for many years. And I think that was part of the reason that I drank, was because I had all of these ridiculous guilts that, you know, are not anything, you know, that we make up about ourselves. So when I was out in Los Angeles, one of the last projects that I did, I was working in TV and film, and I was, you know, my husband and I were both, you know, working all the time as actors, which was pretty great. But I started writing my own projects, and one of the projects that I wrote was called Booby Trap, the very breast show in town. And it was for my mom, and it was like a vagina monologues for the breasts.
Yeah.
And there was music, and there was a lot of different monologues about a woman's experience of breasts, not like what were always shown in, you know, magazines and on TV, but like, you know, too big and too small, or breast cancer, or second base, or exploitation, or, you know, all of these, you know, things that we actually deal with when you have breasts, and what they mean. And for some people, they're ticking time bombs, or for other people, they're, you know, their ticket to fame. You know what I mean? So right. There's a lot, you know. Yeah. There's a lot involved with our woman's relationship with the breast. But anyhow, so I did this show for my mom, and this is the long story of how I became a minister, but somebody came to see that show. We were doing it as a fundraiser for Susan G. Komen and for We Sparks, which is Tom Hanks's cancer foundation in Los Angeles. And somebody came out to see it from the Chicago area, from Elmhurst College. And my desire, that we had done the show a couple times, my desire was to sit in the audience and watch it. Like, I just wanted to experience it.
Yeah, sure.
So they came and they said, hey, can our theater department do a production of your show for our professor who's battling breast cancer? And I was like, this is perfect. I would love that. Like, what a gift. So I sent him the script and the music, and then the producer and I flew out to see this production in Elmhurst, Illinois. And I had never been to the Midwest. You know, I grew up in New Jersey, flew back and forth to New York, to Los Angeles, and drove a couple times. So when I got here, I had this like total visceral experience that, oh my gosh, I'm supposed to live here. So I called up my husband, and he was working on a TV show at the time, and I said, we should move to the Chicago area. And he said, he was like crickets for a little while on the phone. And then he was like, okay, let's do it. And I was like, what? I go, wait a second. I go, I shoot out these crazy ideas, and you have to shoot them down. Like, that's our plan. Like, you can't, this is an insane idea. Of course we can't move. We have a house. We have 4 kids. They're all in school. We know everybody. Everybody knows us. We had this nice, tight-knit community that we lived in. And, but he was like, no, I think it'd be really great. And then the wheels started rolling. And the next thing you know, we were selling our house in Los Angeles. We sold it to the kid from Jurassic Park.
Wow.
Who looked, to tell you the truth, he looked about 23. I think he was 23, but he looked about like 17 at the time when we sold. I was like, oh my God, we're selling our house to like this kid. But anyhow, so we sell our house, we move out here, and then we have this like total kind of meltdown year, like that chrysalis year where you don't know anyone and no one knows you and you lose everything you thought you were. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was like, before we left Los Angeles, everyone was saying, you're so brave. And I was like, what do you mean brave? We're just doing what we're supposed to be doing, and I know this is where we're supposed to go. And when I got here, I was like, oh my God, I am not this brave. This is really a bad idea.
When it all sets in, like you said, when all your friends are back where you came from, and then there's that gap, because you can't just make instant friends, those deeper friends. And for some reason, even though there's all this virtual way we can connect, it seems like time just passes and you're not like staying connected. I know when I go back and forth between Oregon and New York, same thing happens, and it's like this weird, weird place to be.
Yeah, and we didn't know anyone when we moved here, like
Mm-hmm.
no one. And I went to this spiritual community because I was a licensed practitioner, so they were holding my license, so I got to know people, right away. But getting to know people and actually connecting with your tribe of people,
Oh yeah, totally
two
different.
different things, right?
Yeah.
And I remember my minister saying, like, you can't microwave friendship,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like, no, shit, I really want a microwave friendship, I just really want,
Like
that
popcorn.
connection. So, yeah. So, anyhow, it took a little while, but so I started working at this spiritual center. I was working, doing youth and family and helping to support spiritual leaders, grooming spiritual leaders, and starting small groups. So that's what I was doing, and I was happy with what I was doing. And then I did this visioning one time for this retreat, and the visioning is this process that was created by or downloaded by Reverend Bernard Beckwith from Agape. He was in The Secret.
Uh-huh.
And it's a 4-step process that you use. And I say, like, to people, like, I don't leave home without it. Like, if I'm going to do anything big or important, I do a visioning. And it's his process. It's a really easy process. And what you do is you go into meditation and you ask 4 questions. And the first question is, what's the highest vision? What's the Holy Spirit's or the divine intelligence or what God's highest vision, whatever you choose to call your higher power? What's the highest vision for this project, right? Mm-hmm. And you write down everything you get, and you might get things in, pictures or song lyrics or images or feeling tones. Whatever you get, you just write it down. And then the second question is, what do I need to let go of in order to step into this? And then the third question is, what do I need to embrace or embody in order to step into this vision? And the fourth question is there anything else? So a lot of people do the vision boards in January for their year. So this was just like a warm-up thing to really get in alignment with God's plan so that you could write or do or create your vision plan from that information as well.
Sure.
So I was doing this visioning for these women, and I decided, well, I'll include myself in it. So I did the vision, and at the very end of the vision, when I asked, is there anything else, I got really clear the words, going to the chapel. And I was like, what the hell does that mean? Like, am I going to get married again? Like, I had no clue.
I just immediately break out into song.
Yeah, I know. I was like, going to the chapel. So then the very week, I was in my office that I was doing this little retreat, and across the hall from me was this singing coach that I was friends with. And we were planning on doing this little camp for kids where she was going to do the singing part and I was going to coach the acting. We were going to give these kids a little, creative toolbox that they could use on auditions. So I go over to her and we start to talk about this workshop, and she says, and if it gets too big, we can go and we can rent this place. And she hands me this brochure, and on the cover of the brochure is a picture of this chapel that I saw in my head, like the exact chapel. And I was like, I go, Tracy, this is so weird. I just saw that chapel the other day in my head when I was doing this vision, and I got these words, going to the chapel. And she was like, oh, that is weird. But I literally had no clue what that meant. Mm-hmm. So then we go on about our way, and we end up not even doing the camp. But, a couple months go by, and my minister asked me if I could this is actually how it happened. He asked me if I could do a talk at the church. And I had spoken before. I'd had these odd things fall into my lap where I was like invited to speak in front of 8,000 high school students. And I'd been speaking around with 12 steps. So I didn't, and I'd been an actress for so long that I didn't really have a fear about speaking. So he asked me to do a sermon on A Course in Miracles. And I was like, yeah, that sounds great. I would love to be able to share that with your community. And then something happened where it fell apart. Like he said, oh, I got somebody the same week and I'm so sorry. And I kind of felt a little bad, but I was like, well, whatever, God knows me where I'm at. And if I need to speak, I'll speak. He goes, I'm going to make it up for you. I want to make it up to you. To make it up to you, I'm going to give you a series of talks. I'm going to give you 3 talks. And I was like, okay.
Yeah.
It was so weird. It wasn't like I wasn't trying to navigate or, get anything. So I go, okay, that sounds great. And he was going away for this portion of the summer, and I was going to do it in July. So the first visioning happened in January, and these talks were going to happen in July. And I prepare for these talks, and then something happens the last talk, which is my older son, the night before I go to, and every time I do the talk, I feel great. Like, I feel like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to be doing, and this is so effortless. I get great response from, from the parishioners, and I feel like I'm really sharing what I know to be true, and I feel like I'm being fully used completely. Mm-hmm. I guess I should say that before I left Los Angeles, the last job that I did was on Dexter, and I was murdered on Dexter, and I was laying on the floor on Dexter, looking up at the ceiling with blood all over me, and I was thinking, is this what I'm here for? Like, I don't know. Like, I feel like there may be something bigger.
To be killed off in the first episode, I mean.
Yeah, I was killed off, but thankfully, there's sometimes these cool little jobs where you get killed off. This was the first time I was ever killed, but I ended up being on 3 episodes, like my picture, so they pay you the same amount. So it was like, it was nice. A cash cow for me.
There you go.
So anyway, I started doing the prayer of Jabez from the Bible, because I wanted to be used in a greater way. And I didn't know how to do that, but the prayer of Jabez is, Lord, that you will bless me indeed, that you will extend my territory, that your hand will be with me, that you will keep me from fear, that I will not cause pain. And I did this for like a week, just to say, use me in my highest self, not just like some cog in someone's wheel, where I'm a bloody corpse on the ground. So that's when my sister called me and said, I have a gig for you down here in Texas where you're going to talk in front of all these high school students. And so that was the beginning of my saying, like, it's your gig, not my gig, and I'll do what you want me to do. Yeah. So these 3 gigs came to me for talking at Bodie, and the last one, the night before the last one, I had my talk ready, and my son, my ex-husband called me in the middle of the night, and when your ex-husband calls you in the middle of the night, it's not a booty call.
No. That's a bad, bad news call.
So I was like, what the hell, at 2 o'clock in the morning? And he's like, Owen got into a car accident, and he rolled the car, and he's out on, he's up on this island where he was staying, and I went into like intense fear, like a mother does at 2 o'clock in the morning when they find out their kid's in a car accident. And I knew that I was supposed to give this talk the next day, and I knew that my talk was supposed to be on fearlessness, and I felt fear step into the room and kind of say to me, like, what you going to do now? Oh. Like, are you going to be able to bring it tomorrow? You're supposed to be up there, like, really being fearless and knowing that love is the truth. And I kind of had this real great experience of putting my faith into action. Sure. And and during those times when you're rattled like that, it's not that easy. So sometimes it takes like getting down on your knees and saying, I don't know what this is for, but I trust that everything is working out for the highest good, no matter what that looks like. Mm-hmm. So it turned out that he was fine. He wasn't harmed, but, the car was totaled and nobody was hurt. But even like my ego came in even after finding out that news saying like, yeah, but what if he wasn't fine? What if something happened? What if he killed someone? Mm-hmm. And I could feel again this fear taking over me. And again, I had to say to my ego, like, I'm not going to dabble in the ramblings of a madman. That did not happen tonight. So the next day I got to go in and I had to throw my sermon out and do the sermon that was provided for me the night before about how sometimes in the middle of the night you're going to have to wrestle with your own fear, and how sometimes fear has a great poker game that wants to, immerse you in this ridiculous struggle of nothingness. Yeah. So from that, I kind of really got this idea of like, oh, I'm not doing this. Like, I just have to listen. I don't have to organize. I don't have to plan. Course in Miracles says a healed mind doesn't plan, which sounds crazy. But when you practice that, and that would be a one way of practicing, of really trusting that the Holy Spirit's going to provide every word you need, mm-hmm. or your higher teacher is going to provide everything that you need. So I got confident in my ability to do that. So still, I wasn't thinking about being a minister, but I went back to continue teaching Course in Miracles in my office. And one day, not too long after that, I was teaching from A Course in Miracles, and all of a sudden, it was like click, 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 click. Everything fell into place. And I looked at the people that were in the room, and I go, oh my God, I'm supposed to go to that chapel and start a fucking church. Mm-hmm. That's what I said to him. And the women in the room, they go, a fucking church? Okay. one of my fears when I first became a practitioner, the teacher who was licensing us said, what's your biggest fear about stepping into your, spiritual leadership? And a lot of people had a lot of different fears of like, I won't be good, or I'll be a fake or a fluke, or I'll get it wrong, or, whatever. And my fear was, I will have to stop cursing and I won't be able to wear tube tops anymore. And the funniest thing is I don't even own tube tops. So it's like we have these irrational fears, but, God takes you exactly as you are. Yeah. And, although I try not to use all my colorful language when I'm actually in service, I don't refrain from using it because we're all exactly who we're supposed to be. So anyhow, we went over to this church, this chapel that she showed me, and we called the woman, and it turns out it was this beautiful historical chapel that was just renovated. It had wheelchair accessibility, it had brand new bathrooms, and there was no congregation in there. There was just like a couple of gals that were teaching yoga, and they would rent it for baby showers every once in a while. So it was like this beautiful chapel, and we were like, we want to rent this. We want to start doing a church here. And they were like, okay, great. It was $60 for an hour, so it was very cheap and doable. Somebody gave me the first $2,000 to put the down payment down. I said to the Holy Spirit on my bike ride home that day, like, what the hell am I doing? I'm not a minister. I actually have a ministerial license online, but that's like a fake, it's not a real thing. And, like, who am I? But, I said, plus, I don't want to work in the summertime, So the Holy Spirit was like, okay, we'll just run a church that goes the school year. And I was like, oh, that's good.
You're like, can I do that?
Yes. So every resistance I had, when I brought it to my internal teacher, it, gave me a palatable solution. And so now we have this beautiful ceremony that we do once a week. And, my desire was really for my kids to have a spiritual home instead of having to drive an hour to where I felt spiritually fed. And at this sermon, what we do with the service is we do a new spin on Mass, MASS. And we do M is for meditation, A is for affirmative word, and SS is for sacred service. So we sit in a circle, sort of like the Quakers do, and we pray in, we sing the song, Lord, prepare me to be a sanctuary. Our church is called Sanctuary. And then we do some readings. Sometimes they're from the sports pages. Sometimes they're from, spiritual books. We find God where God is. And then I usually just kind of give a talk, and then we open it up to conversation, to the community. And, the kids, the parents, the, people are dying to be in conversation about their spirituality. We don't want to have the, pyramid of like guy at the top and you get what you get and you don't get upset and you just listen. We want to participate. Right. And so that's the long story of how I became a minister.
Well, I love it because it's all, the thing is it's all perfect, and it's actually time for us to wrap up. So can you believe?
You're kidding me.
No.
I don't get a word in edgewise.
That's all right. I'm just the container. So I let whatever is supposed to happen. So I do have one last question before you. Okay. So going back to miracles, what is a practical tip that the listeners can use in their day-to-day life to help bring in or recognize miracles that are showing up in their life and kind of get out of the way?
Okay, great question. Miracles are our natural state of being. So our happiness doesn't, we have happiness because of who we are. The ego tells us that we have to generate it by doing the things that make us happy, but those things only remind us of our natural state of being. So something that you can do to stay in alignment with miracles is to, one of the first lessons of A Course in Miracles is to say, I don't know what anything is for. And as soon as you're able to really embody the idea of not knowing what anything is for, you have a greater ability to rest in the mystery of God, the great mystery of God. And if you have a healed relationship with God, which is, just infinite love, you will start to notice the synchronicities. Deepak Chopra says two things happen when you begin to align yourself with miracles. One, you stop worrying about everything because it's not your responsibility. And two, you start noticing synchronicities all over the place. Yes. So the tool would be to surrender what you think you need to be doing, and just constantly ask, holy power, or divine intuition, where would you have me go? What would you have me say? What would you have me do? And with whom? And just follow that direction.
Yeah. Okay, so one last clarification, just so, because there are these words that we put out there, and sometimes when we're challenged, we start to think, what the hell does that mean? So what does it feel like to surrender? So people know, because it's about letting go, but when you're in that space, and it's like, what does letting go or what does surrender mean? So what does that feel like?
Well, A Course in Miracles is two things. First of all, it's forgiveness. It's authentic forgiveness. And the second part of it is fearlessness, stepping into your bigger self. But to surrender, we get hooked up, we get caught up when we're in unforgiveness. We get hooked up by what we think. So the ego is going to sing you two lullabies all the time. Those lullabies are, you're not good enough, or this is not worthy of you. So it's like this harmony that goes on all the time of, oh my gosh, I'm not good enough, or this isn't worthy of me. And sometimes it's in unison, And so if you could just say, I am perfect and this is perfect. This is the right and perfect classroom for me. These are the right and perfect people for me. And God is bringing me to this, and God will bring me through this. And I don't have to even know how it's going to happen. I just have to have faith that everything is for me and nothing is against me. So cultivating that kind of faith, some people do it through using affirmations. Some people do it by keeping their side of the sidewalk clean with really, moving into authentic forgiveness. And I guess that's really a whole other conversation, but an important one. If you have a healed relationship with your internal teacher, it shouldn't be too hard to surrender into it. But you have to trust. The number one ingredient to establishing that relationship is trusting it implicitly, like a little child trusts his mother. When the kid sits in the passenger seat, the mom says, we're going to go here. It doesn't tell her how to drive or how to get there or who needs to be there. It just says, okay. And that's the kind of surrender we need to establish with our higher power. Like, okay, you got me. I trust you. You know my highest good. I'm going to enjoy the ride.
Yeah. It makes me think of, we trust that we're always going to be breathing. We don't have to think about breathing. So same kind of thing. It's that feeling of, I don't think about breathing. And so letting go of trying to worry or figure things out and just relaxing into. So,
yes. Yeah. And another tip that you can do is surrender means surrendering into this moment. So in this moment, who's here? Like, who's right under your nose? What is your body feeling? What is your, what feelings do you have? So your feelings can bring you to this moment, and just paying attention. A lot of times people, say, well, where do I have to go? Where do I have to just pay attention to this moment, because the miracles are right now,
Definitely. Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, this was such a fantastic conversation, and I loved hearing about your journey, because there's so many pieces that we can all take from that and reflect on our own lives. So I think that, there's just value in hearing that process you went through. So how can the listeners find out more about you and connect with you?
Well, they could go to MaureenMuldoon.com, and I'm doing a virtual conference right now with miracleshare.org. Nice. Coming up in October. Great. I got a couple of more talks over at the Bodhi Spiritual Center in October, and I got one coming up in North Carolina in November. But yeah, I guess the best way would be, and I have a YouTube channel where they can start to check out some of the first lessons of A Course in Miracles. Yes. Maureen Muldoon YouTube. And
cool.
Yeah, and also, I'm just one teacher of A Course in Miracles. There's some really great teachers, and the best thing to do is just see, just if you're interested in this book, just ask the Holy Spirit, like, where, where would you have me go? And I just know that the right and perfect teacher and students will come under your nose at the exact and right and perfect time.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you again for joining me and just having this juicy conversation today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I have to say, like, my husband says to me, you say more words than I can listen to, so I hope it didn't.
No, it was perfect. It was perfect. And the great thing is it's recorded, so if people need to absorb it on different levels at different times, then they can do that.
I'll tell you two things about it. One more thing about Course in Miracles is A Course in Miracles, the backbone of it, it says all separation from your peace happens when the son and daughter of God remember not to laugh. And so when we start to take things too seriously, so laughter is a huge thing in regards to staying in the present moment and enjoying miracles. Laughter brings miracles, and miracles bring laughter.
Mm. Oh, that's great. That's great. So, well, thank you everyone for listening to the show. Are you ready for more miracles to start showing up in your life? Well, a great place to start is by subscribing to the Awakened Goddess Show, your place for practical spirituality for daily living. Also, if you enjoyed what you heard today, please give us a 5-star rating and review. And until next time, bye everyone! Thank you for listening to this episode of The Awakened Goddess. I hope you enjoyed today's show and took away something you can start using in your life right away. For more spiritual insights and to listen to more episodes, subscribe to The Awakened Goddess Show at thegoddessnextdoor.com and discover wisdom that'll change your life.